Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of Living Out Loud, the podcast for victim survivors, support systems of domestic abuse and violence, and also created by, survivors of domestic abuse and violence. This is episode 4. This is the episode about verbal abuse. And as you can see, I'm flying solo. Um, there will be no interaction this way, but there will be interaction this way because I'm talking to you. So this is about verbal abuse. And one of the things that I can say is that in regards to verbal abuse, that is where my previous relationship, my previous partner, let's just say that was his time to shine. I have saved every email, every text, every message through parenting app that we use to communicate as a reminder of what I left, why I left. I don't often reread them. There is no point to that, but I do keep them as a reminder. The parenting app that we use now is court mandated, and that was something that I petitioned the court for so that I could block him on my devices. Um, so that I didn't have to deal with his harassing communication. So parenting apps, if people don't know, are monitored and the language is monitored. And if anything is a red flag, um, it's transcribed and it's kept and it's noticed. So one of the things that happens sometimes, I'm not going to say all the time, just sometimes, is when you are leaving an abusive relationship, sometimes the abuse, the verbal abuse will escalate. Okay. And you'll be hit with a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the things that my ex said numerous times was that the reason I didn't want to be married to him anymore was because I was going through a midlife crisis. And I returned that to be, it wasn't a midlife crisis. It was a midlife like revelation. It was a midlife realization. It was a midlife, um, get me out of this crisis, is basically what that was. So it was not a midlife crisis. It was me coming to a decision, a very well-informed decision to leave this situation for myself. So not a midlife crisis, but then again, verbal abuse. Um, so I've done some research and I found some websites, and of course, there's numerous websites out there that address abuse in all forms. But in regards to verbal abuse, um, Psych Central was one that I found that had a really apt definition description of verbal abuse. And I'm going to read it to you. Um, it says abuse is any pattern of behavior intended to cause harm. When it comes to verbal abuse, words, tone, and gestures of communication become the conduit for a broader type of abuse called emotional abuse. When someone says something hurtful as a means of asserting power or control, um, even if it doesn't cause you emotional distress, it's still verbal abuse. And this is the part that I find to be really relevant. Abuse is not defined by your response to a behavior. It is defined by the intent of the other person. So your response to this behavior is just that, it's a response. It's a reaction to an action of somebody else. And your reaction is not to be judged. It is the action that should be looked at. And I also wanted to mention that on a lot of domestic abuse violence websites, um, when you're on there, if you choose to go on there for whatever reason, you will sometimes see what is called a quick exit button. And I would show this to you, but it doesn't show it very well on, through camera. But when you're on there, if you're reading and you're taking a moment or you found a moment and you had some time and you wanted to look something up, if you need to exit that website quickly, they provide a button. And that button will shut the website down, right? So if it's a time sensitive thing and you need to get out, there's a button that will shut that website down. And it may just shut the website, but it also may remove it from your browser history in case that's being checked. So you can feel some sense of safety if you want to explore or research what's going on, right? Like to see if there's resources out there for you, looking up definitions, descriptions, seeing if what you're experiencing falls under the umbrella of domestic abuse, domestic violence. You do have an option for a quick exit. Sad that that has to exist, but also very smart of these websites to provide it. So just so you know, in case you weren't aware of that, there is a way to exit it quickly so that you're not caught, for lack of a better word. That comes from Psych Central. Now, types of abuse, the Very Well Mind website is one that I found. And they have all the types of abuse on here. And I'm going to start at the beginning. Best place to start, right? Blaming, right? This type of abuse involves making the victim believe that they're responsible for the abusive behavior, okay? That they brought this verbal abuse upon themselves. So they are to blame. They're the reason for it. Condescension, often disguised as humor, sarcastic comments, right? Um, and they're intended to belittle or demean. And when you don't find it funny, um, that just means that you don't have a sense of humor, right? So, but that is also verbal abuse. Criticism, harsh and persistent remarks. They're meant to make the person feel bad. Um, they're not constructive. They're deliberate. They're hurtful. Um, they're constant. They're not constructive. It's not constructive criticism. Okay. Um, it is meant to be painful. It can be public. It can be private. But it is meant to demean. Gaslighting. Now, this is a term. Okay. Gaslighting has seemed to become a pretty popular term. And it's actually a pretty old term because I believe the movie Gaslight, I didn't totally look it up, but I know that it came out in like the 20s or the 40s or something like that, right? And a remake was done with Julia Roberts and Sean Penn. Gaslighting is meant to make you feel like you are crazy. Gaslighting is meant to make you feel like what happened didn't happen. It's meant to make you feel um, like you don't have a correct recollection of the events, that you're questioning your own reality, right? Like, and that's a pretty, that like toys with your head. And that's the purpose of it, right? It toys with your head. Humiliation, when you're insulted in public by your partner, spouse, meant to be painful. I mean, really kind of made to make you look like, you know, trivial, right? Small, um, stupid, maybe not worthy of anything, not a contributor to conversation, like um, you're a joke, really. Judging. This type of behavior is you're being looked down on, right? Nothing you do is right. Nothing you do is enough. Nothing's good enough. Um, Manipulation is used to control um people in a way, like using words. So, if you really loved me, you wouldn't do this. Or if you really loved me, you would do this, right? It's like a test. Um, if you change your behavior in an effort to show them that you love them, well, then you mean something. It's manipulative, it's harmful, it's hurtful, it involves guilt trips. It's a way to get you to do certain things or to get you to stop doing certain things. Um, it's a way to take control over you and your actions or words or thoughts. Um, Name calling. I don't think we have to explain this one too much. Abusive, derogatory terms, meant to target someone's self-esteem, meant to lower or destroy their self-esteem. Many words can fall under name calling, but I'm gonna go right for it. Okay, I'm gonna go for the mother of all derogatory terms aimed at females. Um, the C word, which I've been called the C word. And since I'm someone who is a kind of a word nerd and I like to learn about word origins, I actually looked up the origin of the C word and came around in about the 1200s, believe it or not. Been with us for a while. Thank you. Um, and its origin was a term of contempt directed at females. It was never bastardized or evolved into that. It began as that. I find word origins to be really interesting. I sat in a class about word origins, and like the word fuck is actually an acronym, originally an acronym, fornication under commendation of the king. The word shit stands for ship, high, and transport. So that if, you were shipping goods and they fell to the bottom of the shipping vessel and became damaged or rotted, they became shit, right? Um, I'm a pretty sweary person. I'll be the first person to admit that. But the C word, I actually have a real problem with saying. Um, its pronunciation is just so rough. It really is. But name calling, right? The mother of all derogatory terms for a female. And I have been called that. Ridicule. Typically, you'll be made the butt of a joke and it will be in public. And it's meant to demean and it's meant to diminish. And if you don't find it funny, then, you don't have a sense of humor, right? But it's verbal abuse. I'm going to keep going here. Threats. These are obviously, I mean, threats are obviously meant to frighten, control, um, manipulate the victim into compliance. Um, nothing works better than making someone fearful in order to control them. And I have some examples of that. Um, when I was in my situation and we would fight and we would argue or I'd be ranted at and I would be frustrated with the course of the conversation, which really wasn't going anywhere unless I agreed. Um, and I would get frustrated. And when I get frustrated, I like cover my face and I kind of go like, oh, you know, and he would say to me, when you do that, I want to punch you in the face. And that's a threat. Um, I didn't do anything about it, unfortunately, but that's a threat. And, just a threat of physical violence sometimes keeps you in line, or at least keeps you fearful, so you don't continue with your line of discussion. Withholding. This is when someone refuses to give you attention or affection. They won't talk to you. They won't be in the same room with you. This is a punishment, for not behaving the way you should. I have an example of this as well, also called the silent treatment. I back in 2016, which was my flashpoint in my life in regard to this relationship, I'd made plans to travel to see two good friends of mine who lived in a different state. And my spouse at the time was well aware that I was going. And the night before I was leaving, he told me that he wasn't okay with me going anymore. And I said, "Well, why were you okay with it?" "No, you're not." And he said, "Well, I'm just not." I said, "Well, I'm still going." So the next day, he refused to take me to the airport. And so I drove myself and I left my car in short term parking. And I contacted him and said, grab a guy, go get the car, bring it back to the house so it doesn't stay in short term parking and we don't have to pay a ridiculous amount. And then I was down there. I would call every day to talk to my children. And I would say, put your dad on the phone. And I could hear in the background, nope. And so he wouldn't come to the phone, depriving me of communication with him. And of course, my kids saw this. Um, and so he wouldn't speak to me while I was gone. And frankly, looking back on it, thank you, because I actually didn't really want to talk to you anyway. But that was his way of punishing me for not for not for going. Was his way of punishing me for going because he told me not to, and I went anyway. So I'm a fully formed human. Thank you very much. That's withholding. Impacts of verbal abuse. They could be short term and long term. Um, depending on the person, depending on the extent. But some of the most common impacts of verbal abuse are anxiety, changes in mood, chronic stress, decreased self-esteem, depression, feelings of shame, guilt, hopelessness, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, social withdrawal or isolation, substance abuse. Those are some of the effects of verbal abuse. Um, I was speaking to my sister the other day, and I was telling her that in the early years of my marriage, probably in the first 5 years, I was diagnosed with grinding my teeth, um, vertigo. A couple years after that, esophageal lesions, which actually landed me in the hospital. I look back on it now, and all of those items, all those health issues came from chronic stress. And they came from the chronic stress of being in this relationship and being, well, abused, um, verbally, emotionally, mentally. And the body keeps the score. That's actually a book. And abuse, even verbal abuse, can have a toll physically on your body. And since I have not been involved with this person, I don't grind my teeth. And I haven't had a vertiginous episode, knock on wood, knock on wood, because vertigo is awful. And anybody who has ever experienced it will tell you so. And I don't have esophageal lesions anymore. So there's a plus, one of the many pluses. So those are the impacts. Now, another thing that they say is that when people, another impact of verbal abuse is it can leave someone feeling inadequate, inferior, stupid, and sometimes because they've been explicitly told that's that That's what there are. That's what they are. Like you're not good enough. Okay, you're not good enough. Um, you're a failure, you're flawed, you're weak, you're, you know, all of those things. And there's a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt that is, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Think about it. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. So you can try, but if I choose not to participate, then it's not going to happen. And sometimes we have to find it in ourselves, even though we've been beaten down verbally, maybe physically. We have to find it in ourselves, to not participate in this. And it is so pervasive and it is so sometimes overt, covert, um, insidious, it just sneaks in. Um, you don't realize it's happening. You question that it's verbal abuse. You're not quite sure, but it is. And if any of those things that were just listed sound familiar to you, then it is. And I have a message, I guess. I have some thoughts to verbal abusers. Um, your perceived control is tenuous at best. One day, the person that you are abusing is going to hear a song. Maybe it will be Rearview Mirror by Pearl Jam. Check that one out. They're going to come across an article. Maybe it will be in Psych Central or Healthline or Very Well Mind or any of the other numerous websites dedicated to domestic abuse and violence. They're going to watch a movie. Maybe that will have undertones of domestic abuse. Maybe they'll see themselves in that movie. They could be approached by a family member, friend, coworker who has noticed something not right. They might even watch or listen to the fledgling little beast. And they're going to realize something. They're going to see you for who you are. They're going to see you for who you are. And they're going to see that you are nothing more than words. And when the only words that you have are ones that intend to harm, you don't have much. So every attempt at control is going to light a fire of motivation. And every degrading, demeaning, belittling word that you utter is going to be fuel for that fire. Because they're finding themselves again, and they are finding their worth again, and they're finding their value again, and they are loving themselves again, and they're returning to who they were before you deliberately and methodically derailed them. And they're going to leave your ass. They are going to leave your ass because they have found themselves and they realize that they matter. And they realize that they want to have a life that is happy and fulfilled and positive. And they might go out to the world to serve a population that needs it. They might use their experiences to help somebody else Well, they might even start a podcast. They're going to take a look around and they're going to say to themselves, I deserve better than this. More importantly, I want better than this, and I'm going to go get it. They're going to live out loud and they're going to leave you far, far behind because by the time that they come to that decision, that very, very well informed decision, it's going to be final and you're going to be gone. And all the words that you have are going to have no effect and they're going to make no difference because they've chosen to live better life and they've chosen to live out loud because they realize that they matter and they're leaving that up to themselves and not you. So for those who are watching who are victims right now, you matter. And maybe one day that can be your story as well. Maybe when you look back, that can be your story, but you matter. And if you don't believe it, like I said before, I'm going to tell you over and over and over again until you do believe it. And that's how we like to end on this podcast. I also need to thank Levi Britton for our music, intro, outro. I also need to thank Mike Cohen for doing our intro, outro slides. I also like to mention Keone Hollingsworth and her podcast on Apple. And I do believe she's going to be a guest fairly soon. So we're looking forward to that. But thank you all for listening and watching and sticking with it. Um, this is really important to us. This episode was particularly important. Like they're all important, but then this one was particularly important. It speaks to me. And, I'm eternally grateful for the experiences that I have had because I'm able to turn them into something good and I'm able to serve, hopefully, in my little way, and have a purpose and live a life with purpose. So thank you. And join us again. We'll be back next week. I haven't quite decided on the topic yet. That's part of the fun, picking a new topic. But join us again. Stay with us. And I also appreciate everyone who's listened and also shared. Um, this is just something that we feel really called to do. So thank you so much for sticking with, and we'll see you next time.